Hello, YouTube. So I wanted to do just a video series picking apart an essay called "Faith and Knowledge" by Jacques Derrida, and it's the first essay in a collection called Acts of Religion. But you can also find Faith and Knowledge by itself in PDF form out on the internet, right? I won't link you to that, but it exists out there in the world. Now, there are two reasons why I wanted to pick apart this text. First of all, I think it presents a really interesting picture of religion and thinking about religion, right? It presents a really, I think, probably alien way of dealing with the subject of religion, alien in relation to YouTube, and that's something that I appreciate, right? In some way, the goal is always just to throw things at the YouTube community that's alien to them, right? The other thing too is that Derrida is called a postmodernist. And he gets a lot of shit from analytic philosophers, analytic philosophy being the tradition that sprung up from Bertrand Russell and such. Anglo-American philosophers, you'll see the word obscurantism thrown around Derrida. You'll see wild accusations about Derrida, actually. Either that he doesn't have anything to say and he's just using complex language and incomprehensible language to cover that up, or he's I don't know, he's some crazy relativist, right? None of which is true. And you see these allegations hurled at quote unquote postmodernism in general. First thing to understand is that postmodernism doesn't exist, right? It's a figment of the imagination, in the sense that the thinkers that are grouped together under the heading postmodernism don't belong together. People like Foucault, people like Lyotard, people like Derrida, people like Lacan, they're hastily grouped together as postmodernists. But they didn't really interact with each other much, and the people who read their texts, in France at least, where they were all working, don't read each other's texts, right? They were considered different schools of thought. In America, we slapped the label postmodernism on them. They do share a couple things in common, but they're really, really far apart, right? There's nothing that you can point to that links them together beyond maybe an interest in structuralism. But that's probably about it. None of the people that I mentioned are relativists. You get that complaint a lot, the belief that, the idea is that they believe that all worldviews are equal or something, which is just clearly not true if you read their texts, right? They clearly don't believe that. I think you get this because they're not willing to take as an assumption that one group is right and one group is wrong when they're looking at things. When they're picking apart, when they're doing their analysis, they're not saying to themselves, this is the right answer, and then doing an analysis of some other text and being like, this was a wrong answer, right? That's not what they're after when they're looking at texts, and I think that might lead people to believe that they're relativists. Maybe. You see, let's talk about the word postmodernism, because this is a misunderstood term. Postmodernism wasn't coined by Lyotard, but I think it was most famously articulated by Lyotard. The idea is that modernism for him, that is the Enlightenment period, right, was marked um, by stories, by narratives that we tell each other. Things like Marxism, for instance. Grand overarching narratives of history. Christianity could be read in this way, etc. And indeed, a certain way of thinking through the progress of science could be understood in this way. That was the modern period, right? What Lyotard has said is that after World War II, our trust in these grand narratives of history has lessened, right? We feel less like, it's a good idea to identify with some. He used the word meta-narrative, right? And he calls this the postmodern condition, right? The idea, again, being, so how do we organize our lives in the absence of something like Marxism, which tells us a story about how the whole world, how all of society came into being, right? How do we organize all of our lives in the absence of Christianity, something like that? And the question is, or the important thing is that, as far as I'm aware, nowhere does Lyotard say that this is a better state, or this is what we should be doing, right? This is not a proscriptive statement, it's a descriptive statement, right? This is the world within which we live, and he's just trying to look at the world in which we live. So, in some sense, there is no such thing, as far as I'm aware, of a true postmodern relativist. But what you do see is people saying our society has become relativistic, right? In the wake of the collapse of grand narratives of history, society has adopted the attitude that my truth is as good as your truth. That's very different than saying that that's the way things are, or like, there is no truth, or something like that. So there's a slight, it's one of those things where people call Nietzsche a nihilist, but he wasn't a nihilist. In fact, his great enemy was nihilism, right? He just happens to talk about nihilism a lot, right? In the same way, like, the postmodernists are not themselves relativists. They would claim that society has become relativistic. But you see a lot of people, you see people who don't really understand what's going on, thinking that these people are saying that, like, everything is relativistic, science is on a par with astrology, or something like that. On the other hand, you see people saying things like, they have nothing to say, it's all just jargon and obscurantism, right? And there's definitely a lot of jargon. That's definitely true. And the other part about the obscurantism thing is that they're not the point of a text by Derrida is not to say, here is my thesis, and then here are support statements for that thesis, right? Like, that structure isn't in play. What Derrida wants to do is sort of play with texts and play with ideas and sort of improvise and all of this. Derrida's a very playful person in this way. Foucault, I think that there are theses, actually, in Foucault's work. I think that he does provide models of how things function and stuff. So I don't know how you can apply that to Foucault. Lacan is probably the worst violator in terms of obscurantism. But that doesn't mean that he didn't have anything to say, right? He was. You get the sense with Lacan that he was fucking with you, right? I'm not somebody who's read Lacan in any depth. I have read Zizek, fairly extensively, and Zizek is one of Lacan. He's a Lacanian, so the only picture that I have of Lacan really is via Zizek, who's kind of dedicated his life to unpacking Lacan. So yeah, the point is that I'm going to read a text called Faith and Knowledge about religion from the point of view of somebody who is a terrible postmodernist. And I'm going to try and, again, there's a lot of jargon. The structure of the text is difficult to get a hold on. I'm going to try and unpack some of that jargon. The text is very, very rich. There's lots of references in the text that are very, very, very subtle. There's lots of playing with language. There's foreshadowing in the text and stuff. So it's a really layered text. It's not like reading, I don't know, a work by John Searle or Thomas Nagel or something like that. It's you know, philosophy is a kind of writing for Derrida, and he exploits the hell out of writing, right? And that's something that has to be taken into account when reading his text. There's an aesthetic dimension to it, and yeah. So I'm going to try and help the viewer through this stuff as best as I can. I'm going to take these texts. They're numbered paragraphs. I'm going to take them 2 paragraphs at a time, probably, because it seems like I can make about 10-minute videos that way. And I'm literally going to read and unpack things as I sort of go along, and hopefully I can make it comprehensible. One other thing too is Derrida plays a game, or likes to play a game, where he will say a word and then in parentheses translate it into like 5 different languages. There are reasons for that. When he starts slipping into other languages, I'm just not going to read those parts because I can't pronounce other languages. So yeah, I can't do it without butchering them. So I'm just going to try and skip over the other languages thing as best as I can. So thank you, and I hope you enjoy, and I hope you download a PDF and follow along. Have a good day.